Hello, welcome to another tonalist landscape oil painting demonstration. This is your painter in residence, M. Francis McCarthy, and the painting I'm bringing you today is yet another entry into our solo pigment series, and it is the amazing color Burnt Sienna. Burnt Sienna, come on up. That's supposed to be cheering. I know you might be thinking, what is he going for? Anyway, you can see I took the pine board and I kind of rubbed it down with a little bit of burnt sienna and some oil, and I kind of pushed it in a little bit. Now the pine board was prepared with 2 coats of transparent gesso, and this was the strategy I sort of came up with for this series, and it worked pretty well overall. There were a couple paintings where one I did on gray, and I think 1 or 2 others I did on the masonite, and but this worked out all right. And burnt sienna, I love you. You're the most amazing color. I've had burnt sienna on my palette almost since the very beginning, and I love it. It's so useful. Let's talk about my history with burnt sienna. First of all, I colored my boards with burnt sienna ground uh, the first 6, 7 years, maybe, yeah, 6 or 7 years of my painting career. Various different degrees, but I was a big believer in painting on red because I believed that it set up a bit of a zingy harmony against those greens, and it is very, very useful thing to do. You should try it if you haven't already. Since that time, I've kind of settled more on browns, but red, brown. If you were with us yesterday for our, oh, I did it yesterday. Who knows if you've ever watched it or will watch it? You should watch it though. It's the burn number video. Now all the earth pigments are totally related, and hopefully I have enough time that I've got some awesome articles. And I don't want to hit you with too much science and chemistry, but there's some very interesting stuff that goes on with the earth pigments. Anyway, one of the things that came up in the burn number video was like, brown. What is it? It's orange with some black, right? It's green with a lot of red in it. It's a very mysterious color when you start digging into it. But burnt sienna is brown. Many people would look at it and say, oh, it's brown. It's a very reddish brown. If you'd say, what kind of brown? They'd say, oh, it's a reddish brown. In a lot of cases, it might be all the red that I would ever need in any landscape painting. I can say that. Burnt sienna is super, super useful, and one of my favorite. So I've been prepping my board with burnt sienna for a long time, or did. Now like I said, I've moved into more of a brownish tone, like a burnt umber tone, or variations there. Burnt umber into like raw sienna. I really love drawing with it. Now, there's several different versions of raw sienna. Like if you buy raw sienna from Winsor Newton, it's PR 101, and that's not actually the original burnt sienna. That is still iron oxide, but it's been chemically modified to be way more transparent, I think, and it functions very much like burnt sienna. But I have so I've used the PR 101 version for a long time. Transparent earth red from Gamblin, just called burnt sienna from Winsor Newton, and in a lot of Daler Rowney, Georgian, a lot of other brands, the burnt sienna is the PR 101. I think it might just be a little easier to manufacture since it's a bit more chemically evolved. The PB, I think it's PB7. It's dug up from the Sienna region in Italy. So now, burnt sienna and raw sienna, like I'm talking about burnt sienna today, but the burnt sienna is raw sienna, basically that's been heated up and takes on a far richer, redder coloration. One of the things, and I probably don't want to harp on it too much because we'll be reading a bit of the article, but one of the things I found out today when researching this color is that it's chemically identical to yellow ochre. But if you're a painter, you might go, well, yeah, it sure doesn't act like yellow ochre. Yellow ochre's thicker, pastier, slightly more opaque, more gritty, although I have noticed a bit more of a grit. It's not exactly grit, it's not like sandpaper grit, but there's like a bit more of a mealy texture to raw sienna that reminds me of yellow ochre. The burnt sienna, I haven't used a brand that evidenced this quality, but there probably is. I don't know. There's a wild amount of variety in the burnt siennas, and that's one of the things that came up in the burnt umber article I was reading yesterday. Is like one of the reasons for the getting into the synthetic earth, the synthetic iron oxides, was they would be easier to achieve uniformity of color, say for the home painting industry and things like that. Anyway, so now my other favorite use of burnt sienna, and if you've watched any of my videos, you know I'll tend to mix a green, or pre-mix a green. And now my stock go-to green is a mixture of acrylamide yellow, also known from gambling as Hansa yellow, and ivory black or lamp black. They both work well. Carbon black or ivory bone black, either one works great. That gives me a green that has a certain amount of transparency to it, a little bit of give, because the acrylamide yellow and the ivory black, the acrylamide yellow is semi-opaque. Ivory black, of course, is quite transparent, but makes a very nice green. That's Mike's green. If you see in older videos, you'll see that listed as a color. And one day, maybe one of these paint manufacturers will put out a color called Mike's green. Who knows? Anyway, I'll mix those, but one of the first things you'll see me do is just chuck in a bunch of burnt sienna. And one of the things I learned very early on is that the more reds that you put into your green mixtures, generally the more realistic and better they look. There's a huge range of greens in nature. And many of them don't really look that good in a painting. And interestingly, a lot of those greens aren't necessarily captured that well by photography either, in my experience. As humans, we perceive a very huge range of different green colors, where the camera seems to break everything down to about 6 or 7, maybe more. Maybe, okay, let's be generous and double it. Let's say 14, right? Anyway. We got about like 7 minutes to go here, and I found some very interesting articles. So I think most of the people that were just dilly-dallying, having a dalliance with this video are probably gone. So let's hunker down and learn something about this. Now this is from the Natural Pigments site. Natural Pigments is a great company. I have bought pigments from them before. It's not that easy to get paint from them out here in... I think I did get some Rubylev. You can get paint. Their brand is Rubylev, but they also sell just the pigments, and some people are really into that. But I'm going to... Now, one thing about burnt sienna is it works for watercolor, works for fresco. It works with everything, it interacts very well with other pigments. It doesn't... it never conflicts or has a problem. Anyway, this is from Natural Pigment site. It's the Burnt Umber page, and it says, Origin History. The pigment now identified as burnt sienna. Did I say burnt umber? Sorry, I have a mental problem. This whole video is about burnt sienna, just so you know. Burnt sienna is a calcinated yellow iron oxide earth pigment, generally warmer and more transparent than other yellow earths. In the scientific study of historical pigments, it is not generally possible to distinguish yellow earths and siennas. So you got to always keep in mind that it's raw sienna is burnt sienna. Burnt sienna is the burnt part. Even in the case of modern pigments, there is often not a clear dividing line between yellow earth and raw sienna. That makes a lot of sense. And that's one reason why I didn't have raw sienna on my palette for a long time. I was like, oh, I want raw sienna. I'll just put a little burnt sienna and yellow ochre together, and I'm in raw sienna territory. But raw sienna has some characteristics that I like, and it kind of leans into, first of all, it's like not overly saturated. When you start burning that pigment, I guess it takes on a lot more saturation, and that little bit of saturation is going to go into the ochre and give you a different quality. Yeah, I know it may be splitting hairs, but as we're trolling down the lane, sometimes little things mean a lot, and sometimes little things don't mean anything. And it really depends on your attitude, what you're trying to do, the amount of experience you have, and how intuitive you are, and how you work with your pigments and things like that. The pigment Sienna owes its name to the Italian city Sienna, located in the Tuscany region, an area of rolling hills. It is famous for the mining and production of the pigment since the Renaissance. The localities where Sienna earth is found, we don't need to get into that. It's also, though, found in the United States. The Luberon Mountains in France, the Harz Mountains in Germany. Earth of similar qualities found in the United States. In Pennsylvania, deposits of Sienna earths are found. And the mountain ranges of Virginia, good, rich deposits have been developed. In the European part of Russia, been used as a pigment since prehistoric times. Iron oxide earth pigments, as they are often called, are an important group of inorganic pigments derived from minerals. Iron oxide pigments are yellow, red, and brown, but artists know them as ochre, sienna, red oxide, and umber. Unlike manufactured pigments, the color of iron oxide earth pigments varies with the composition of a particular segment of earth from which they came. The color of Sienna earth pigments is derived from three constituents: the principal coloring ingredient, a secondary coloring ingredient, and a base. The combination of these ingredients produces the particular color of the earth. The innumerable forms and variations in which these ingredients can combine result in a wide range of yellows, reds, and browns. Principal coloring ingredient iron oxide hydrate is the principal color producing ingredient in Sienna earths. The properties of the particular iron oxide present in the earth determines its color. Whoa. I'm getting heady. Secondary coloring ingredients is calcium, manganese oxide, carbonic material, silica, and limestone. Very interesting. Natural Sienna earth is a yellow pigment with more or less brownish red tinge in the mass tone and a more or less yellowish undertone. It differs from the yellow ochre by having a much deeper color, more than twice the tinning power, containing only 2/5 as much silica and only 1/3 as much alumina. Hey! I know, it's getting a little heady. One thing also I saw here, and this might explain why, sometimes you squeeze out a tube of burnt sienna, just oil. Well, they have to add a ton of oil to the burnt sienna for it to work as an oil paint. That's something I read here. Very interesting, very useful color. And I have to say, I have a real appreciation for the actual original burnt sienna, because it's connected to a tradition in human history going back to our earliest ancestors, and that to me is one of the reasons why I actually produce oil paintings, physical paintings. I used to be an artist too. Well, I was, I'm an old guy, so I wasn't always working digitally, but I did a ton of digital work, and I moved out of that and into making real paintings with real pigments, using real brushes, and because I want to be connected to that history of picture making as a human being, and that's very important to me. And that's one of the reasons I have all the earth pigments in my palette, not just for that, mostly because I like them. I like the effects they give me. They're extremely useful and versatile. And what's funny is that, I went from yellow ochre and burnt ochre and thinking, I don't need raw sienna, and I don't need burnt umber, right? Both of those are variations on the other two, but they all have their uses. Anyway, I can see we're getting close to the end of the video. Thank you so much for joining me today. This one seemed to go by really quick. I'm really, really happy with the way this painting turned out. By the way, you can tip on over to my website. You can buy a painting, or you can make a donation, or you could just look at all the groovy art there. And I I appreciate you watching this video. I really do. And until I come back with another video, I would also appreciate if you would take good care of yourself, your family, all your loved ones. Please try and be patient with other people in this awakening of humankind, and stay out of trouble.